realizing that paying for the veterinarian is one of the biggest expenses of the rides, and we as managers don't want to totally lose our shirt, we like loop rides. So you go out in a loop, you return to camp. Okay, now I'm going to explain a little bit. I've been talking about the pulse and how important that is. For the competitive ride, you come into a check, and in 10 minutes your pulse is going to be taken. And that's where, if you're anything above a 36.8, you start losing points, okay? For an endurance ride, or an LD ride, you come in and you enter the pulse box when you think your horse is at the designated pulse. It might be 60, it might be 64, some rides it's even 68. And you walk into the pulse box and you yell check, and a pulse taker will come over, and if your horse is truly at that 60, then you're given that card with a time on it, and your time stops there. What happens sometimes is you come into the pulse box and the person you're chasing is already in there, so you get kind of greedy and you step in and you check, and your horse isn't down, and you have to leave the pulse box. I'm very, 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 very lucky because I've got some horses that, as Jen calls, are freaks of nature. And a lot of it is conditioning, and we're going to talk about conditioning in just a minute. A lot of it is pure genetics. I got this mare that she's a 28 resting pulse, and she'll do 100 miles and her pulse will seldom get over 56. So I come in, I make it off and run the last quarter mile into camp. I can usually walk right into the pulse box and she's down. Well, people who've been riding with me, maybe keeping up with me, their horse may take 6 or 7 minutes to come down, which means I get to leave 6 or 7 minutes sooner than they do. I firmly believe that a ride can be won in the pulse box. Yeah, the trail's important. You can't just go out there and lollygag if you want to win, but in the pulse box the ride can be won. And I must digress just a second because I'm talking about winning. But the beauty of this sport is, once again, like I said, to finish is to win. And when people start a ride, if there's 60 people starting a ride, we don't usually do rides that big, but let's say there's 60 people starting a ride. 10 of them will be of a mindset that they want to win. Another 10 or 15 will be out of a mindset that they want to be top 10. Then there's going to be a bunch who, I'm going to be middle of the pack, I'm going to be fine. And then there's going to be a bunch who are just like, oh, please let me get through this ride. Okay? Every single one of them is just as important. And every single one of them should be treated, and is treated, with the same amount of respect by their fellow riders and by the veterinarians, and that is the beauty of this sport. I have a friend who one year decided he wanted to be heavyweight champion, and he rode his horse every weekend. But he rode him slowly and conservatively and took really good care of him, and he told me he only had 2 competitors, the time and the trail. He didn't care what anybody else's horse was doing. He was going to ride his horse the right way. He ended up champion that year. So winning, finish is to win, and we truly believe that. And we treat our turtle people, because we have people who are the perpetual turtles, we treat them with just as much respect, because dang it, their horses probably come through looking better than a lot of the horses that win. So anyway, if I say something about winning, this sport is not about being first. Winning is getting through and having a sound horse. That's winning. So then you got to vet through again, and then you got to hold. And the holds depend on how long the manager wants to give you for a hold after your horse meets the mandatory check. If you're only riding 20 minutes, 25 miles, your hold's going to be maybe 40 minutes. And you've got 40 minutes to feed, water, take care of your horse, electrolyte your horse, then you're back out on trail. So that's how a ride goes. I think we have some pictures that show what each of these things are. Here we are on trail. Sometimes the weather's really nasty. I think this day it was. It was much nastier than it looked. It was a cold rain, like 36 degrees. So there we are on trail. Here we are coming into the vet check, card in hand, because we want to be able to get into the pulse box and.
And that's not me.
No,
That's Lord.
That's me and West, a friend of ours. And here we are at the vet check. A good horse will go right to his food and water because he knows, they get to know, oh, this is my rest, you know? Is that snow?
No, it's Stan, it's Palmyra.
Oh, that's Palmyra, okay, all right,
I forgot, oh, never mind.
okay.
What's your pulse?
This is, she's checking her pulse before she goes into the pulse box to make sure her pulse is gonna be right. And now the professional person, you know, the pulse taker, might take it to confirm that the pulse is right. And then you vet through and do a trot out. You don't go back out if your horse isn't sound. And then the rest of the hold you use to get your horse hydrated, feed him. You don't have any time for yourself. To heck with yourself. You know, you've got 30 minutes here. Sometimes you're lucky enough to have a crew. It doesn't happen very often, but this was at a 100-mile ride, and you were crewing for me, and the gal I was riding with, that's her husband. So we got to like sit down. It was really nice, but it doesn't happen very often. Conditioning. Friday is Valentine's Day. Traditionally, I start my conditioning. Our season usually starts late April, early May, and if I'm not going to a ride in February or something, our conditioning starts on Valentine's Day. I don't care how cold it's going to be. We start our conditioning on Valentine's Day. Conditioning your horse, it depends on the horse himself, okay? I've got a horse that has 5,000 miles, almost 6. He's not going to require the same amount of conditioning that a horse with 800 miles, to his credit, is going to need. So, and Jen and I sort of know the horse, know what we plan on doing with the horse for that season. And, but once again, you don't go out and run 15 miles on him on Friday. We won't do that. We will probably take them out and walk 5 miles in the deep snow, which is a pretty good conditioning because I've been walking in the deep snow, I know. So you try to start 2 months before the season starts and just slowly work your horse up. If any of you are athletes and do any kind of conditioning yourself, you know it's not a let's get it all done in 2 days thing. I'm going to let Jen talk about electrolytes. You brought the electrolytes, you go talk about them. Because this is something, when I started this sport, there was a man that I revered greatly. His name was Bob Milkey. And one day he took a big wooden spoon at a vet check and put some salt on it and opened his horse's mouth and put some salt on his mouth. And then about 5 minutes later he said, look, Smokey's drinking. And we said, well, isn't that amazing? So we've gone from a wooden spoon and salt crystals to a whole business of making electrolytes. And
there are thousands of kinds of electrolytes. We do have ones that we prefer because they're kind of geared towards endurance riding. Especially like the Light Now, it's a product that has a fast absorption rate for the horses if they get a little crampy, like if you get a leg cramp or something like that. They get the same things, only in different areas of their body. So it has a fast absorption, it can usually help them through it a lot, but we electrolyte them so they get the chemical balance in their body better, because when they're expending that kind of energy, those minerals are coming out of their system in the form of sweat, usually. Some horses have a tendency more to get a different imbalance. And it also helps if they run into a problem. There's something called thumps and tying up are 2 problems that can happen, and it's due to an electrolyte imbalance. So those are just a precautionary thing. The phrase is you cannot over electrolyte because they just pee it out. That's kind of debatable too, but those are just a couple different examples. The orange handle thing is called a dosing gun. They use them for cattle and sheep too. And we use that sometimes, or we just use like a regular syringe to syringe them with. And most of the horses like them, they get used to it pretty fast. And it does help them to drink as well.
It's the equivalent of Gatorade.
Yeah, it's kind of like Gatorade without the sugar. So in that, it kind of perks them up too, because you said one time, I think you gave something to Ella, and all of a sudden she kind of perked up
Oh
a
yeah,
little bit.
it's incredible what they do. A lot of people carry them on trail, and if you're doing a loop that's maybe really, really long, we'll stop an electrolyte during. I think I think the electrolytes, since I've been in this sport, is probably the #1 in advancement that I've seen. Oh, go hold up the second #1 advancement. See if you can guess what I mean.
Is it this one?
Yes. You looked at any of those old pictures?
Yeah.
Nobody was wearing this.
A helmet. And there's a bunch of different kinds. This I had in my car because at some point we gotta start riding. But they are starting to design more specifically for, Lori rides in a bike helmet because it's, oh, and I see my helmet's starting to come apart. Because it's a lot cooler for you, but there are helmets specifically designed and certified for equestrian use. A lot of them try to now cover the back portion of your skull and that brainstem, because once you get, it's supposed to cover further down to help if you get a concussion or something come off the back of the horse. It's supposed to protect the back of your head.
Lori never used to
None of us did.
ride with helmets. Where was that ride where the lady?
None of us did. John doesn't go to rides very much with me, but we were at a ride up in Wisconsin, and I was riding along and I heard an ambulance. And about 15 minutes later, I got to this road crossing, and John was there, and he was visibly shaken. And he said, "You're getting off of that horse. You're not riding." And I'm like, "What the hell?" And he was standing at the road crossing, and this lady came across the road, and her horse slipped and fell with her, and nobody wore a helmet then. John was the first one there, and brain fluid was coming out. She lived, but she was never right again. And I said, "Well, can I finish this ride first and then get a helmet?" But we now have a lot of our rides. Our ride is requiring helmets, and almost everybody wears them now.
You said you would never ride again without a helmet.
Yeah, I don't even get on a horse to see if the stirrups are the right length unless I have a helmet on. So,
Things can happen so fast.
yeah, so that innovation, helmet, and also the clothing. We all rode blue jeans, and we all developed what we called pizza legs, because we were wet, always wet, either from sweat or from your crew throwing water on you, and then your legs would rub, and all of us just have massive scars all up and down our legs. I think it was my niece Brandy, who was the first one, said, "I think I'll ride in Lycra running tights." And now that's what we all ride in. And now they make all these tights for them. So the clothing, the helmets and the clothing has changed a lot. The saddles have changed quite a bit. But once again, like I said, this sport is for any breed, any size person. We have friends who weigh well over 200 pounds who ride well and do well. I was talking about clothing. Oh, saddles. You go to a ride and you look at the types of saddles and the types of tack, and nobody rides in the same thing. I mean, and it's a sport for nonconformists, really. Nobody is told what you have to ride in. You ride in what's comfortable for you and your horse. Do we have another thing on the extra? Our special diets.
Wait, Lori, are the saddles always Western, or can they?
Oh, no, but we have friends who ride in Western saddles.
There's English and Western, there's Dad rides in an Aussie, but there's a lot of crossover in what I call crossover, because there's a lot of English type but a Western build, because the bottom line is the more surface area on the bottom of that saddle, the better it can distribute weight. So like my saddle, it looks like an English saddle, but it's got panels underneath it instead of just a saddle tree with bars, so it distributes my weight better on a horse.
I ride in this cheap little forward seat English saddle, but I have great big Western, they're not even Western stirrups. Endurance stirrups, because imagine, oh, this is what I thought you could do. I thought you could ride 100 miles in a pair of English irons. You know what they look like? And I couldn't figure out why my big toe almost fell off. So then we went to these nice big wide stirrups, you know. So everybody just jerry rigs for their comfort. As for special diets, once again, everybody feeds differently. And every horse requires different things. I mean, I've got a horse that if you give her this much grain a day, she's going to be fat. And then I've got another horse that if you give him 2 buckets of grain a day, he's still on the verge of being skinny. You know, every horse has, just like people, you know, they all have different dietary requirements. You
want a high fiber diet, and you want a lot of water if you can.
And when you're riding, you want things that are going to be digested slowly, which, like Jen said, the high fiber. So, but you talk to 10 different endurance riders, and they're going to tell you 10 different things to feed your horses. And
I was thinking of the picture for the stop, you get done with one loop and they eat and drink, and then you take off again. Is that not hard on the?
no, you know, that's the trail rider
Fallacy.
misconception, or whatever you call it. You know, somebody tells you, oh, you got a horse, only let him have 10 sips and then pull his head away. If my horse will drink 15 gallons, I'll let her.
Really?
And she does. Because
But you do have to be careful, because there are horses that will get a really bad stomach ache from it if they're not used to it, if they're not in condition.
if they're not in condition. Or if you let them drink 15 gallons and then go tie him to a trailer and then go start drinking with your buddy, you know, and don't move your horse again. But no, you let him eat, you let him drink all you want, because they're going to go out and move again.
And if they don't have that in their system, you can run into serious problems, because the evolution of the horse, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is that their digestive system is supposed to be constantly moving. It's not supposed to have like a massive amount of feed sitting in their gut, and that's what gets them through the ride.
They don't binge eat like a dog.
Yeah, the design is that they constantly need that food in there to go through the system.
You know, when you look at the wild horse, he spends 20 hours a day eating. Well, we can't do that with our horses. Most of us don't have enough pasture that a horse can do that. So what do? 2 times a day, we bring them in and feed them. And that's not the way their digestive system's supposed to work, and that's why our horses colic and have other problems. But what else can we do, you know?
I think you should, at some point, tell the story about your horse disappearing and then finding.
Well, let's get to the end of the, and okay. Just a couple little quick stories, and then we have to do the final part of Bite the Bullet. Or unless there's any questions. Okay, we have some things over here that you can look at. Between Jen and I, we won 3 national championships, which is pretty cool. And I have a horse, but the thing is, those national championships were won at a race that was called the national championship. But you're still only beating the horses that came to that race, you know. But this year I won a national championship for every horse that ever ran a race all year long was in the same competition. So we've done fairly well between the two of us of taking these horses that nobody else could do anything with and turning them into champions.
So can I ask, what would you attribute your success to? If I could, have you being humble, or how do you know? I mean, is it a matter because of conditioning, or you're just really careful, or you just really know what you're doing? Or?
You know what's
All
real
good.
top of the rock? Luck. Really, it is. A lot of it is luck. We condition our horses and they don't step in a hole and break their necks. Haven't had any horrible, terrible accidents driving to a ride, getting our
We
horses
did have
hurt.
to change, what, 3 or 4 tires?
Yeah, but
last
the
year.
horses didn't get hurt. Truly, I'm not trying to be silly.